Hey there. Tonight, let's step back. Not to marble halls or lightning-filled skies, but to the old stories shared beneath the stars. This is a journey through the labors, the legends, and the long, winding tale of a man who was strong, sure, but also lost, flawed, and unmistakably human. This isn't a story of triumph shouted from mountain peaks. It's about burden, persistence, and the quiet kind of heroism found in simply surviving. If stories like this help you unwind, feel free to like and subscribe. But only if it truly brings you peace. And drop a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something comforting about seeing all the different places these gentle myths travel. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, let your thoughts slow down, and let's begin at the start of a myth that still matters. We'll begin softly, with a tale as old as temples and twilight, stitched together with superstition and dusted with the fingerprints of mortal confusion. This is the story of Heracles, or, if you prefer the Roman version, Hercules. But let's not rush. After all, you're probably listening in bed, and nobody ever stormed Olympus with a yawn. Our story doesn't begin in the heavens, but on earth, in the city of Thebes. A place shrouded, as always, in mythic haze, there lived a woman named Alcmene, noble, patient, and married. Her husband, Amphitryon, was off to war, which, in Greek myth, is like leaving the doors unlocked during a storm. Something unexpected is bound to slip in. Enter Zeus, or rather, descends Zeus, king of the gods, storm wielder, nymph chaser, Zeus, whose loyalty in marriage could best be described as flexible. He became interested in Alcmene, not because she wanted divine company, but because she didn't. That's practically an invitation in Greek myth. Zeus disguised himself as Amphitryon, returned from battle a little early, and spent the night with Alcmene. He even stretched the night into 3, manipulating time as only a god of thunder can. Alcmene, unaware, believed it was her husband. Thus, the seed of a demigod was sown. The next morning, the real Amphitryon arrived. Alcmene was baffled, and Amphitryon even more so when she congratulated him on a romantic evening he hadn't yet had. Eventually, the truth unraveled, and predictably, it upset a lot of people, but none more than Hera. Our Hera, queen of Olympus, wife of Zeus, long-suffering and sharp-eyed and perpetually furious, though rarely at Zeus himself. Instead, her fury landed on the women he pursued and the children born of those adventures. In this case, her anger focused squarely on the unborn Hercules. Now, just a quick historical detour. The Greeks didn't view their gods as all-powerful. The Olympians had strengths, but also flaws. Petness, jealousy, an inability to resolve conflicting. They were, in short, a divine soap opera. Hera played her part with style. When Hera learned of Alcmene's pregnancy, she didn't just stew in silence. She tried to stop Hercules from being born at all. She convinced her daughter, Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, to delay the labor indefinitely. Alcmene was trapped in endless contractions, an agonizing magical stalemate. Luckily, her clever servant Galanthus tricked Eileithyia. She shouted that the baby had arrived, startling the goddess into releasing her hold. And so, Hercules was born. From the start, Hercules was no ordinary child. He was massive, with the strength of many grown men, and an appetite to match. A nightmare in the nursery. Hera, still determined to make his life miserable, sent 2 serpents to his cradle, but baby Hercules, as the myth goes, grabbed a snake in each hand and strangled them. When his nurse returned, he was gurgling with delight. The snakes limped beside him. This story shows up early in the Hercules cycle, painted on Greek vases and told in classical literature. One famous amphora from around 520 BCE shows Hercules handling the snakes with ease, while onlookers appear aghast. Scholars think the tale entertained people and emphasized his divine strength from from the very beginning. It also set the tone for what followed. Hercules' life would always be a tug of war between divine favor and divine wrath. He was both blessed and cursed, the perfect mythic contradiction. Hercules wasn't an only child. Alcmene also had a son, Iphicles, by her real husband, Amphitryon. So, the household had twin boys, one a demigod, one mortal. Imagine those family dinners. Iphicles, brave in his own right, would always stand in his brother's larger-than-life shadow. The Greeks loved these metaphors, using the brothers to explore fate, lineage, and the blurry boundaries between human and divine. As a boy, Hercules was taught by the best. Chiron, the wise centaur, schooled him in medicine and music. Linus, a strict music master, tried to teach him the lyre, a required skill for a noble youth. Unfortunately, Hercules hated being corrected. When Linus struck him for a mistake, Hercules struck back with the lyre. The result was tragic. Linus died, and Hercules was sent into exile for manslaughter. Greek legends are full of these educational disasters. Despite this, Hercules kept growing stronger. He hunted lions, wrestled centaurs, took on feats that would outdo any modern gym routine. One early triumph defeating a lion terrorizing the plains of Cithaeron. He wore its skin afterward, the same pelt often mistaken for the Nemean lion in later tales. Hercules was famous for his appetite, not just for food, but for life. He once supposedly finished an entire banquet before the guests even arrived. Whether true or not, these stories made him seem larger than life in every way. Yet he wasn't without faults. His temper was legendary and dangerous, and would haunt him all his days. The most tragic example came in early adulthood. Hera, ever the patient strategist, struck again. Not with snakes, but with madness. One day, under her influence, Hercules lost his grip on reality. In his frenzy, he killed his wife Megara and their children. When he finally came to his senses, the grief was overwhelming. Seeking forgiveness, he turned to the only path the Greeks believed in: purification through suffering. At the Oracle of Delphi, he begged for guidance. The Pythiat, speaking for Apollo, told him to serve King Eurystheus of Tyrans and complete a series of near-impossible labors. Only through this could Hercules wash away his guilt and earn immortality. But that's a story for another night. Historically, Hercules wasn't invented out of thin air. He probably started as a Bronze Age hero. His name appears in Mycenaean tablets as Heracles. Over the centuries, his legend evolved, reflecting the needs of each era. In the 5th century BCE, Athenian playwrights made him a tragic figure. The Romans turned him into a symbol of imperial strength. He was worshipped, not just in stories, but in real temples with festivals and athletic games in his honor. The Olympic Games themselves sometimes included tributes to Heracles as a founding hero. He even shows up in Etruscan art, bridging mythologies across the Mediterranean. He became the model of the strong man who suffers and endures, a theme that still resonates today. And so, we end this chapter where it all began with a baby in a cradle, strangling serpents and never finding true peace. Born of gods, raised among mortals, Hercules started as a contradiction. Wrapped in muscle and prophecy, he would fight monsters, descend to the underworld, and die in agony. But not yet. For now, he sleeps, as I hope you do. We'll pick up our tale not in glory, but in sorrow. Because before Hercules became the world's most famous hero for hire, he first had to fall. Hard, tragically, and in front of everyone. This chapter, dear listener, begins with madness. Divine madness. The kind that doesn't thunder in, but sneaks in with the whisper of a goddess holding a grudge. Last time, Hercules had grown into a legend. Strong, wild, with a beard that did most of the talking at parties. He'd married Megara, a princess of Thebes, and for a while, maybe even found happiness. But Hera wasn't going to let that stand. The queen of Olympus, never one to forget or forgive, struck again. This time, she didn't send snakes or spells. She sent madness, the most insidious weapon a god can wield. One moment, Hercules was at peace. The next, the world twisted into a nightmare. Driven mad by Hera, he mistook his wife and children for enemies. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a tragedy. When he finally came to, the palace was silent. His family was gone. The pain broke him. The Greeks called this a ruinous madness, a curse from the gods, not just bad luck, but a cosmic reckoning. Even heroes weren't safe from falling apart. Let's pause here, as the Greeks would, to reflect. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a moral crossroads. The Greeks believed deeply in miasma, the pollution of the soul after such acts. Hercules, tainted by his crime, couldn't just move on. No feast, no prayer, no apology could fix it. He needed purification, and for a Greek hero, that was never easy. He wandered, broken, to Delphi, where the oracle of Apollo waited. Through her the gods prescribed his penance: serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns for 12 years. Now, Eurystheus was hardly the man you'd want in a crisis. Small, petty, fond of letting others do the heavy lifting. Thanks to fate and Hera's meddling, Eurystheus, not Hercules, had inherited the throne of Mycenae. Serving him was a humiliation, but that was the point. Greek purification was about humility, suffering, and the long climb back to honor. And so began the 12 labors. But before we dive into those, let's linger a moment, because this fall into madness is central. It shows us Hercules wasn't just a brute. He was a man who had fallen, who suffered, and who had to fight his way back. Not by birthright, but by endurance. Megara, by the way, is often lost in Hercules' shadow. In some versions, she survives, living in exile or returning to her father. In others, her fate is final. Greek myth, true to its tangled oral roots, is never one clean narrative but a tapestry, frayed and rewoven through time. Hercules' crime comes up in Euripides' tragedy Heracles, a powerful play about madness and its aftermath. In that version, Hercules returns from the underworld, saves his family from a tyrant, only to be struck by Hera's madness and slaughter those he just rescued. When he wakes, he contemplates ending his own life, but his friend Theseus convinces him to live, not as a god, but as a man who must endure. That's the key. Greek heroes weren't saints. They were mirrors for human struggle. Courage wasn't about never failing, but about rising again after the fall. What about Hera? It's easy to cast her as the villain, and in Hercules' story, she is the antagonist. But taken in context, in a world where gods chased mortal women with impunity, her fury was a kind of protest. Misplaced, yes, but maybe the only weapon a queen had in a court of thunderous egos. The theme of divine madness as punishment runs deep in Greek thought. Even outside myth, ancient writers described visions and frenzies as signs of the gods. In this case, Hera attacks not Hercules' body, but his mind, forcing him into a lifelong cycle of guilt and redemption. Labor seving the Cretan bull, a majestic, wild bull sent by Poseidon and left unchecked by King Minos. Hercules wrestled the beast, brought it back to Eurystheus, who promptly let it go again. Because what else do you do with a sacred bull? Some say this same bull would later be involved in the Minotaur myth. Greek stories love to overlap like that. Labor ate the mares of Diomedes. These were man-eating horses. Hercules tamed them by feeding them their own master, Diomedes. The horses, apparently startled by the menu change, became docile. In some versions, they ended up on Mount Olympus, and one can imagine the gods' reactions to that particular offering. Labor 9, the girdle of Hippolyta. Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, had a magical belt gifted by Ares. Initially, she agreed to give it to Hercules, but Hera, ever the meddler, spread rumors that Hercules was there to kidnap the queen. Fighting broke out. Hippolyta died and Hercules took the belt, a tragic misunderstanding in a saga full of them. Labor 10, the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was a giant with 3 bodies, living at the edge of the world, maybe as far as Spain. Hercules travelled there, built the famous Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar, killed Geryon, and drove the cattle back. At one point, annoyed by the sun's heat, he shot an arrow at Helios, who admired his nerve and gave him a golden cup to sail across the sea. It's the kind of story that's both grand and a little absurd. Labor 11, the apples of the Hesperides. Golden apples guarded by nymphs and a dragon. Hercules didn't even know where to look, so he asked Prometheus for help, then convinced Atlas to fetch the apples while he held up the sky in Atlas's place. When Atlas tried to leave Hercules with the burden, Hercules tricked him into taking it back. A clever twist in a myth where muscle alone wouldn't win. Labor 12, capturing Cerberus. Cerberus, the 3-headed hound, guarded the gates of the underworld. Hercules had to descend into Hades, negotiate with the god of the dead, and bring Cerberus up without using weapons. He succeeded, then returned Cerberus as promised. This final task, crossing into death and emerging again, elevated Hercules from hero to something more egged. Someone who had faced the ultimate darkness and come back. With this, the 12 labors were complete, each one monstrous in its own way. Together, they formed a mythic rare sum unmatched in the ancient world. But more importantly, they served a greater purpose. Hercules had not just survived his punishment. He had completed it. That's an important distinction. Survival is passive, completion is active. It shows intention, resolve, and a refusal to give up. Through these labors, Hercules purified himself, not just of crime, but of anger, pride, and grief. He became not just a hero, but someone worthy of worship. The Greeks saw his story as a metaphor for life's struggles, for fighting through messes and monsters and misunderstandings. And Hercules, through blood and wit, proved that even the curse can find redemption. His legend became a favorite among Stoics and poets alike. Seneca argued that Hercules' immortality wasn't just because of his divine parentage, but because of his moral perseverance. Each labor was a test of character, not just strength. So, as your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slows, rest easy knowing that even the greatest heroes sometimes have to clean stables or chase a deer for a year. True strength is not just in the arm, but in the will to keep going. When Hercules finished the labors, he stood before the world, no longer a man in need of cleansing, but a legend in his own time. His name, once weighted with guilt, now shone with mythic glory. And, because this is Greek myth, peace didn't follow. What came instead was fame, and fame, as Hercules soon learned, could be just as heavy as guilt. His story didn't end with the labors. In many ways, they were just the beginning. The Greeks loved a sequel, and Hercules' post-labor life was packed with more feats, new tragedies, and the growing realization that glory can be its own kind of burden. He returned to Thebes but didn't stay. Maybe because of shame, maybe restlessness, maybe a nudge from the gods. Wherever he wandered, stories followed. He fought battles, toppled tyrants, and rescued damsels with the confidence of someone whose reputation had already become legend. You could say he was the original action hero, the ancient world's answer to a blockbuster franchise. Among his lesser-known adventurers, he played a part in the war between the Lapiths and the Centaurs, creatures who, in Greek myth, represented wild, uncontrolled passions. It's fitting that Hercules, always struggling with his own temper, would end up fighting them. He also visited Troy, long before the Trojan horse, when the city was plagued by a sea monster. Hercules offered to rescue the city in exchange for a reward, usually a royal daughter. He killed the monster, but when King Lomendon cheated him, Hercules returned with an army and sacked the city. Greek myth rarely goes easy on those who break a promise. He even sailed with Jason and the Argonauts for a while, though he left the quest when his friend Hylas was abducted by nymphs. Hercules searched for Hylas, abandoning the quest, showing that even the strongest hero could be undone by love or loyalty. These stories filled out the mythic landscape, making Hercules a pan-Hellenic hero, claimed by many cities, worshipped in countless forms. His image appeared on temples, coins, and statues from Boeotia to Sicily. He was everywhere, always mid-stride, lion pelt billowing, beard blowing in the wind. One story, rich in symbolism, tells how Hercules wrestled the river god Achelous for the hand of Deianira. Achelous, who could change shape, became a bull. Hercules snapped off one of the bull's horns, which became the cornucopia, a symbol of abundance. So not only did Hercules defeat a shape-shifting river, he also invented the world's most festive centerpiece. In another tale, Hercules freed Prometheus, the Titan punished by Zeus for giving fire to mankind. Hercules shot down the eagle that tormented Prometheus, and in doing so, reconciled himself with the Titans and became a savior of human creativity. He wasn't just a tool of the gods, he became someone who could stand up to them for justice. But fame brings its own complications. Envy, misunderstanding, and political intrigue, especially with the gods involved. Consider Hercules' time with the Queen of Lydia. Yes, a queen. And yes, Hercules served her. He'd killed a guest, violating the sacred law of hospitality, and as punishment was sold into slavery. The queen bought him and, in a twist, had him perform domestic chores in women's clothing while she wore his lion's skin. The Greeks found this both funny and unsettling. It flipped expectations and forced Hercules to confront his own identity. Greek myth loves dualities: man and beast, god and mortal, masculine and feminine. Hercules' time in Lydia wasn't just comic relief. It was a challenge. Could a man be strong and still served? Could a hero known for brute strength find value in humility? And so, even after the labors, Hercules' journey continued. Through triumphs and humiliations, through love and loss, always searching, always enduring. Maybe that's why his story lasts, because it's about more than just monsters and muscles. It's about redemption, resilience, and the never-ending quest to find peace, even when the world won't let you rest. In some versions, the answer is yes. In others, it's just another story, one that kept Athenian playwrights busy for years. And then, of course, there were his marriages. Hercules was not exactly known for being monogamous, neither in legend nor in life. After Megara, he married several more times, with Deianira being the most famous of his later wives. But before we get to that final, tragic chapter, let's pause for one of Hercules' most tender stories, the rescue of Alcestis. Alcestis was the wife of King Admetus. When Admetus was doomed to die young, Alcestis volunteered to die in his place. Hercules, arriving at the house unaware of the grief, was stunned to learn what had happened. In a rare moment of pure compassion, he descended into the underworld and wrestled death, Thanatos himself, until Alcestis was set free. No labor, no divine command. Just Hercules, for once, choosing to do good simply because it was good. Beyond his adventures, Hercules was credited with founding cities, starting festivals, and laying down the roots of culture wherever he went. Some Roman writers say he established the worship of Zeus in Iberia. Others claim he dug wells, built roads, and even taught people how to train horses. The line between mythology and civic propaganda gets blurry, as it so often does. Hercules became both a god of strength and a symbol of order. A bit ironic, considering his early life was pure chaos. Even after his labors, the gods weren't done with him. Athena showed up often to lend a hand, and Apollo, who once got into a shouting match with Hercules over a sacred tripod, eventually made peace with him. That quarrel, by the way, ended with Zeus literally throwing a thunderbolt between them. As you do, temples sprang up in Hercules' honor. Festivals, called the Heraclea, were celebrated in many Greek cities. Later, the Romans would claim him as Hercules Victor, the patron of strength and military conquest. Statues didn't just show him as a man of action, but as a figure of burden. Leaning on his club, the lion's skin draped over his shoulders like the weight of memory. He became the symbol of that strange tension between glory and exhaustion. Mortal, but more than mortal. Capable of madness and yet rising to heroism. Able to serve a queen in humility, yet still terrify monsters. His legend grew not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. He was full of contradictions. He was, in a way, all of us. And still, Hercules' story wasn't finished. The great arc of his life was building toward one last, fateful crescendo, the tragedy of Deianira and the poison robe, the love that would prove deadly. But that, dear listener, is a story for another night. For now, let's linger in this quieter chapter, this era of wandering and renown. Let's rest beside the road with our hero. Picture yourself under an olive tree, feeling the warmth of the journey's dust on the breeze. If Hercules hasn't earned rest, he's certainly earned remembrance. Sleep well, knowing that even those with divine strength still live with all the complexity of being human. By this point, the labors of Hercules were less like punishment and more like a job description. You can almost imagine him sighing into his wine cup each night, muttering, "What now?" As another impossible errand arrived via messenger. After 6 tasks, including lion wrestling, swamp battles, and the world's worst stable cleanup, you'd think he'd earned a break. But no. King Eurystheus, always eager to find fault, declared that 2 of the tasks didn't count. The Hydra. Too much help from his nephew. The Augean stables. Hercules asked for payment. Apparently, getting paid disqualified you from heroism. So, with bureaucratic pettiness firmly in place, the total number of labors rose from 10 to 12. And these last 6 weren't the sort of chores you could knock out in a weekend. They'd take Hercules far beyond Greece, into distant lands, forgotten corners of the world, and even to the gates of death itself. First up, capturing the Cretan bull. This beast was a gift from Poseidon to King Minos, who was supposed to sacrifice it. Instead, Minos kept it, so Poseidon drove it mad. The bull trampled fields, smashed walls, and generally made life miserable. Hercules wrestled it into submission and shipped it off to Eurystheus, who, true to form, took one look and hid in his favorite bronze jar. Eventually, the bull was released near Marathon, where it continued its career as an ongoing nuisance, a reminder that mythological pest control is never really finished. Next, the mares of Diomedes in Thrace. These weren't your average horses. They were trained to eat people. Some versions say they breathed fire. All versions agree they were terrifying. Hercules was sent to steal them. After fighting the king's men, he ended up feeding Diomedes to his own horses. Poetic justice, or just practical problem solving? You decide. After that, the mares miraculously calmed down. Eurystheus, predictably horrified, wanted nothing to do with them, and let them loose. After that came an awkward diplomatic errand, bringing back the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. The belt wasn't just a fancy accessory. It was a symbol of her power, a gift from Ares. Hercules, to his credit, started with diplomacy. Hippolyta, impressed or maybe just charmed, agreed to give it up. But Hera, as always, stirred up trouble. Disguised as an Amazon, she spread rumors that Hercules planned to kidnap the queen. A fight broke out, Hippolyta was killed, and Hercules took the belt home. Another almost peaceful moment ruined by divine interference. Then came the cattle of Geryon, a three-bodied giant who lived on an island past the edge of the world. His cattle were prized, watched over by a herdsman and a two-headed dog named Orthrus. Hercules, needing a ride, borrowed a golden cup from Helios, the sun god, and sailed across the ocean. Only in Greek myth do you get a sun god taxi. Hercules took down Orthrus, the herdsman, and finally Geryon himself, with arrows dipped in hydra venom, of course. The journey back was a saga of its own, with Hera sending gadflies to scatter the herd and Hercules rounding them up again. Not his favourite labour, I'm sure. Almost done the apples of the Hesperides. These golden apples, wedding gifts from Gaia to Hera, were guarded by 100-headed serpent and the Hesperides nymphs. Hercules didn't even know where the garden was, so he did what any self-respecting hero would. He wrestled a sea god for directions. Eventually, he found Atlas, who was holding up the sky. Hercules offered to take on the burden if Atlas would fetch the apples. Atlas agreed, but on returning, he tried to leave Hercules holding the heavens forever. Hercules, thinking fast, asked Atlas to take the weight back, just for a second. While he adjusted his cloak and then walked off with the apples. Never underestimate a hero who survived both Hydra and bureaucracy. And finally, the last labour bringing back Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of the underworld. This wasn't about stealing or fighting. It was about asking permission. Hercules journeyed to the land of the dead, greeted Hades and Persephone with uncommon courtesy, and was told he could take Cerberus, as long as he used no weapons. So, using only his strength, Hercules wrestled Cerberus into submission and dragged him to the land of the living. Eurystheus, by now a master of melodrama, reportedly fainted at the sight. Hercules returned Cerberus to Hades, no worse for wear. With that, the 12 labours were finally complete. Hercules had faced monsters, gods, queens, and beasts. He travelled beyond the edges of the map and returned not just alive, but changed, purified. These trials, dreamed up by a cowardly king and fueled by a vengeful goddess, had turned him into something more than mortal. His name echoed in temples, poems, and eventually, yes, Saturday morning cartoons. But, as you might guess, this wasn't the end. The labours had cleansed his soul, but Hercules' life would still be marked by struggle, loss, and transformation. No Greek hero gets to rest quietly, not even the strongest of them all. After all this, you'd think Hercules would settle into a quiet retirement. A little olive grove, a simple villa, maybe a regular dog. But this was ancient Greece, where peace was fleeting and true rest was rare, and even the afterlife could be dramatic. The truth is, the labours were never designed to bring Hercules peace. They were about atonement, about scrubbing away the blood on his hands, but not about making his journey easier. He'd cleansed himself of the madness that drove him to tragedy, but fate still had its grip. So Hercules wandered, restless and legendary, a mix of muscle and myth. Not so much a laid-back traveller, but a hero for hire, revered by kings, called on by the desperate, and sometimes feared by those who knew his temper. He fought battles that didn't make it into the epic poems, toppled tyrants, hunted monsters, and even founded cities. Or so the stories say. The line between the real Hercules and the storybook version blurs, but maybe that's the point. He travelled far beyond Greece, to Libya, where he took down the giant Antaeus by lifting him off the earth, robbing him of his power. A pretty clever move, if you ask me. In Egypt, there's a tale where a king tried to sacrifice Hercules, only to end up sacrificed himself. The hero was not big on surprises. He even reached the Black Sea, roaming lands that Greek sailors spoke of in whispers. Hercules was the first truly Hellenic hero, a legend who grew with every ship that sailed and every story told. Local myths absorbed him. In Egypt, he became associated with Heracles, a warrior god. In Phoenicia, he was linked to Melkart. The Etruscans in Italy had their own stories. And, of course, the Romans would claim him fully, turning him into Hercules, an icon of empire, strength, and just a hint of legendary temper. But even heroes get lonely. And so, Hercules returned to marriage, setting his sights on Deianira, a princess of Calydon known for her wit and independent spirit. Winning her heart wasn't easy. She had another suitor, the river god Achilles, who quite reasonably pointed out his seniority and lack of public chaos. But Hercules never backed down from a contest. He and Achilles battled, the god shifting between snake and bull. But Hercules broke off one of his horns, a piece of godly jewelry that became the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. Hercules and Deianira married, and for a while life was peaceful. But peace never lasts long in Greek myth. Politics got in the way, and the couple set out to start fresh elsewhere. On the way, they met the centaur Nessus at a rushing river. Nessus offered to carry Deianira across while Hercules swam, but Nessus had other motives. Halfway across, he tried to abduct her. Hercules, seeing what was happening, fired an arrow tipped with hydra venom. As Nessus lay dying, he told Deianira that his blood, mixed with the pain of love denied, could serve as a charm. If she ever feared Hercules might stray, a robe soaked in his blood would keep him faithful. It was a lie the blood was deadly poison. But Deianira believed him. Years passed. Hercules kept up his heroic lifestyle, and his admiration for the young Princess Isle became a little too obvious. Deianira, hearing rumors, became desperate and sorrowful. Classic Greek tragedy. Remembering Nessus's words, she sent Hercules a robe soaked in Nessus's blood. Trusting as always, he put it on. The moment the cloth touched his skin, it started with pain. Pain unlike anything he had ever felt before. And that's saying something, given that Heracles once carried the sky on his shoulders. The venom worked fast, sinking into his skin, burning not like fire, but like betrayal. He clawed desperately at the fabric, but it wouldn't come off. The more he struggled, the worse it got. His skin stuck to it. His strength, for once, meant nothing. And there's something deeply human about that. The greatest strongman of myth, brought down not by a monster or a weapon, but by trust, by love, by the unintended cruelty of someone who never meant to hurt him. Realizing the end was near, Heracles climbed Mount Iter. He ordered a funeral pyre to be built. No one would light it, either out of reverence or fear. Finally, a passing traveller, sometimes said to be Philoctetes, the archer, agreed. Heracles handed him his bow as thanks, a sacred weapon that would later play a key role in the Trojan War. Then he lay down on the wood and waited for the flames. As the fire consumed his mortal body, something astonishing happened. His divine side, the part of him that came from Zeus, rose untouched. He ascended to Olympus, leaving behind pain, memory, and the weight of mortality. And then, in one of mythology's most unexpected reconciliations, Hera greeted him. The goddess who had tormented him since birth, who tried to kill him with snakes in his cradle, welcomed him to the heavens and gave him her daughter, Hebe, the goddess of youth, as his bride. It's a neat ending, maybe a little too neat. But myth isn't about fairness. It's about meaning. Heracles became a god. He was worshipped in shrines across Greece and beyond. Athletes prayed to him for strength. Soldiers invoked his name before battle. Ordinary people, struggling through their own hardships, remembered that even Heracles had suffered. He was no longer just a hero. He became a symbol of endurance, of redemption, of the long and painful journey from error to forgiveness. His face appeared on vases, in temple carvings, in the stories told by poets and orators. The Romans built him temples. The Byzantines reimagined him. His story echoes even now in comic books, in muscle-bound movie heroes, in metaphors about impossible tasks, and the will to keep going. Because Heracles didn't just fight monsters. He fought himself, his impulses, his anger, his guilt. And in the end, he emerged scarred, burned, maybe wiser, but finally at peace. Not all heroes are crowned with olive leaves. Some are crowned with flame. Some find their way to heaven not through purity, but through persistence. And so, we leave him, not on the pyre, not in Olympus, but somewhere between. Still walking, maybe, through the twilight of memory, a figure of strength and sorrow, of justice and error. His labours are over, and so are yours, dear listener. Close your eyes and rest. You might think the story of Heracles ends there: immortality, Olympus, marriage to the goddess of youth. A fitting close to a life made of pain, muscle, and fire. But Greek myth never really lets things rest. Even gods, it seems, get restless. And so, Heracles' adventures continued to ripple outward, like aftershocks from an ancient quake. The Greeks didn't put their heroes in tidy boxes. Heracles, though now a god, kept showing up in mortal affairs. His cults grew. His stories multiplied. Cities claimed him. In many places, he wasn't just remembered. He was still present, a hero who, despite his apotheosis, never stopped moving. This next chapter isn't a single story. It's a patchwork, smaller tales, drifting between myth and cult, between rumor and ritual. Heracles the Wanderer, the restless god. Let's start with Heracles and Prometheus. Remember Prometheus, the titan who stole fire for humanity and paid the price. Chained to a rock in the Caucasus, his liver eaten daily by an eagle, only for it to grow back at night. Divine punishment in all its gruesome poetry. And then, one day, Heracles came by. No big motive, he was just passing through as heroes do. He saw Prometheus, still suffering, still bleeding. So Heracles did what he does, took up his bout, shot the eagle with a single arrow, and broke the chains. Zeus, surprisingly, allowed it. Maybe he was moved, maybe just tired of the whole thing. It's a quiet episodic Heracles, the mortal turned god, freeing the titan who championed humanity. Two rebels meeting at the edge of myth, one lifting the burden from another. Not long after, Heracles got tangled with King Laomedon of Troy. The king promised Heracles a reward. Horses, specifically, if he'd rescue his daughter Hesione from a sea monster. Heracles did the job, killed the monster, saved the girl, but the king refused to pay up. Bad move. Heracles returned later with an army, sacked Troy, and killed Laomedon. In the chaos, he let Hesione choose her own fate. She picked Telamon, Heracles' comrade. Together, they'd become ancestors of Ajax, the great Trojan war hero. So, in a roundabout way, Heracles helped set the stage for the Trojan War. Not through prophecy, but because he'd been cheated out of some horses and wasn't about to let it slide. Another story, less dramatic but just as telling, happened in Lydia. Here, Heracles entered into a period of servitude. He was sold as a slave to Queen Omphale. Why? Some say it was punishment for murder. Others say it was penance, a lesson in humility. What's interesting is what happened next. Omphale didn't let him go around smashing things. She put him to work. Spinning, weaving, doing housework. In some versions, she even wore his lion skin and carried his club, while Heracles dressed in her clothes and jewelry. You could see this as comic reversal, and ancient vase painters loved it, but there's more to it. A softening. The hero stripped of his weapons, his temper, his image. A glimpse of the man beneath the legend, or maybe a suggestion that heroism doesn't always roar. Sometimes it folds laundry. The Greeks loved role reversal, flipping expectations just to see what happened. Omphale, strong and shrewd, ruled over the strongest man in myth. Heracles, still powerful, submitted, not out of weakness, but almost out of curiosity. And then there are the little stories. Too minor for epic, too persistent to disappear. He helped the Argonauts, though he didn't finish the journey. He fought at Calydon, though the spotlight was on others. He trained warriors, advised kings, settled scores. He was said to have founded the Olympic Games, though that honor is also claimed by Pelops and Zeus. Still, Heracles became synonymous with Olympia. Statues of him filled the gymnasiums. Athletes poured out libations in his name before matches. He wasn't just remembered, he was invoked, present in the sweat and struggle of athletes. In the Roman world, Heracles was reinvented as Hercules, a civic hero, temple builder, protector of roads, patron of merchants. Merchants prayed for safe passage, soldiers marched under his image, emperors wore his iconography. Even Marcus Aurelius admired him, writing about strength and endurance in ways that echoed Heracles' story. This was a different Heracles, polished, politic, smiling in marble. The wild, impulsive man who burned on a pyre became a symbol of virtue, still powerful, still noble, just a little airbrushed. And yet, Heracles endured, across centuries, cultures, and retellings. Not because he was perfect, far from it, because he was human. For all his strength, he failed. For all his divinity, he doubted. He raged, loved, mourned, and kept going. His impossible labors mirrored the smaller struggles of daily life. Tasks we endure, finish, and remember. There's a ruined temple to Heracles in Agrigento, Sicily. Its columns leant, silent witnesses to thousands of years. No one worships there now, but the stones still hold the heat of the sun, and somewhere in the rubble, a story waits. Not of monsters or labors, but of a man who tried to find peace. And maybe, in telling it, we find a little peace too. The real legacy of Heracles isn't just his strength, fame, or even his immortality. It's that he never stopped moving. He walked through sorrow and flame, across lands and centuries, leaving behind a memory that says struggle is not failure, toil is not defeat, and even the strongest must kneel and rise again. So let the myths continue. Let him appear in temples, in songs, in dreams. Let him remain the wandering god, the errant hero, the old friend we remember when things are hard. His club may be gone, but his footsteps remain. Close your eyes, dear listener, and rest. By now, the story of Heracles is less a single tale and more a collection of echoes. Whispers beneath olive trees, inscriptions on temple walls, images on pottery. Stories carried by the wind from one shore to another. His 12 labors may be done, but, just like any truly legendary figure, his story kept growing long after he died, or rather, ascended. The Greeks didn't care much for tidy endings. Heroes came back, in dreams, in cults, in songs sung over embers. Heracles, most of all, returned, through rituals, prayers before athletic contests, moments of crisis, and sometimes as a very real presence. This chapter is about his final transformation, not just from man to god, but from living myth to living symbol. Even after his funeral pyre turned to ash, Heracles' work wasn't finished. He'd just moved on to a different realm. It starts, fittingly, in Olympus. When Heracles arrived, his mortal side burned away, his divine self risen. There must have been an awkward silence. Hera, the queen of the gods, architect of his suffering, wasn't exactly known for forgiveness. She tried to kill him as a baby, driven him mad, set monsters in his path as casually as setting wine on a table. And yet, something changed. Whether it was compassion, exhaustion, or grudging respect, Hera accepted Heracles, not just into Olympus, but into her family. She gave him her daughter Hebe as a bride. Just like that, the old rivalry ended. Not in love, maybe, but ceremony. Their marriage was symbolic. Heracles, champion of mortal endurance, Hebe, embodiment of immortality. Together, they represented a harmony, the reward of human effort with divine favor. But on Olympus, Heracles was a misfit. Most gods lounged, plotted, meddled. Heracles was all action, a creature of momentum. He didn't take easily to lounging on clouds, sipping ambrosia, or contemplating eternity. So, he kept intervening. Stories tell of him returning to help in battles, to guide heroes, to judge wrestling matches. His status was ambiguous. Not quite god, not quite ghost, not quite memory, but always there. In places like Thebes and Argos, Heracles wasn't just worshipped. He was invited. Shrines welcomed him, sacrifices were made, and unusual rites were performed to call him down, to ask for his help. These weren't just devotions. They were invitations for the god to walk again among mortals. One such rite, the Heraclea, was celebrated annually. It commemorated his death, his burning, his rebirth. Unlike most festivals which praise the god's perfection, the Heraclea was about pain and triumph, the long, scorched road to redemption. His cult grew, and stories multiplied. Some said Heracles now gleamed among the stars, his lion skin sparkling in the night sky. Others imagined him walking roads in disguise, helping travelers, punishing the wicked. Philosophers began to see him not just as a hero, but as a moral example. The Stoics, in particular, loved Heracles. To them, he was the model of virtue, the ideal of strength through discipline. He suffered, endured, and chose action over complaint, duty over despair. To live like Heracles, one philosopher said, is not to be invulnerable, but to be resilient. In this way, Heracles bridged the gap between mortal and god, body and soul, myth and philosophy. He became a kind of spiritual exercise, an ideal of suffering transformed into meaning through perseverance. The Romans, never ones to waste a good god, adopted him as Hercules Victor, patron of soldiers, travelers, and merchants. They built temples, prayed for safe passage and victory. Emperors wore his image. Commodus, the theatrical emperor, fancied himself a new Hercules, fighting in the arena in lion skins. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, spoke of endurance in Heraclean tones. And so, over centuries, Heracles transformed again. Hero, god, symbol, a story for children, a prayer for athletes, a statue softened by rain. His strength endures, just as the need for strength endures in all of us. Of course, there's always the club, the lion skin, those impossible biceps. But over time, even Heracles' strength started to mean something more. It wasn't just about brute force or winning fights. It became about surviving, about the patience to carry heavy burdens, the courage to atone, and the quiet grace of beginning again after failure. His image evolved with the times. Early on, Heracles was wild-haired and wide-eyed, a man who seemed more beast than god. Later, in the Hellenistic era, artists showed him older, heavier, more thoughtful. Still strong, but now he looked wary. Here was a god who had felt pain, a hero who had cried. And through all of it, his labors were never forgotten. Artists kept coming back to them. The lion, the hydra, the stables, the apples, each one turning into a metaphor. They stood for challenges to overcome, trials to endure, personal monsters dressed up in myth. People painted them on cups, carved them into stone, told the stories at dinner parties, temple gatherings, and public games. Not just because they were entertaining, though they absolutely were, but because they carried something timeless. They promised that if Heracles could get through it, maybe we could too. Not by slaying monsters, but by enduring what life throws at us, grief, doubt, exhaustion, shame. And in the end, by still being able to get up and keep going. By the time Christianity spread across the Mediterranean, Heracles had already faded from daily worship. Temples fell silent, sacrifices ended, but his memory stuck around, weaving itself into new stories, a suffering savior, carrying burdens that weren't his, descending into the underworld and returning again. It's not hard to see his shadow cast across later sacred tales. And even today, he's still with us. In gyms, where people push their limits beneath posters of muscled heroes. In literature, where flawed protagonists fight for redemption. In philosophy, where we remember that virtue isn't built in comfort, but forged in struggle. And in bedtime stories, where strength and sorrow walk hand in hand, Heracles never really left. He just changes form. One day he's a statue, the next a star, the next a voice in your head telling you to get up and try again, even when everything aches. His labors are done. Ours, in quieter ways, go on. So, rest, dear listener. You've carried enough for today. Tomorrow, we'll face our own lions. But tonight you sleep. The name Heracles started as a whisper in the hills of ancient Greece. Maybe around a fire or in the shadow of a little local shrine. But it didn't stay there. It traveled, like a pebble dropped into water, sending ripples out across time and distance. As his story spread, something amazing happened. He changed. This next chapter isn't about Heracles as a single mythic figure, but as a traveler, a god without borders, a hero with 1,000 names. It's the story of how Heracles, the son of Alcmene and Zeus, the beast slayer, the burden bearer, became something bigger, a universal symbol, a shape each culture and era could remake for itself. Sometimes divine, sometimes absurd, always unforgettable. Surprisingly, his journey doesn't really begin in Greece, but with the Greeks as they explored, traded, and settled new lands. Even before Athens and Sparta were household names, Greek sailors took to the seas, hugging coastlines, trading oil, wine, and stories. And wherever they went, Heracles went with them. In North Africa, for example, Greek settlers brought Heracles' legend to Egypt. The Egyptians already had a crowded pantheon, gods with falcon heads and crocodile jaws, but Heracles, with his lion skin and club, fit right in. They linked him with their own god Heracles, a creator deity with ram's horns. The city of Heracleopolis Magna, literally, the great city of Heracles, was named for him. In Egypt, Heracles kept his power, but he gained a new sense of wisdom and kingship. No longer just the wild brawler, he became a god of renewal and rule. It's always interesting to see how different cultures take a myth and reshape it, not according to the original story, but to what they need. In the East, among Persians and later Indians, the Greeks introduced Heracles through trade and empire. After Alexander the Great swept from Macedonia to the Indus River, he brought not just armies but imagery coins with Heracles' lion head, temples with club-shaped columns. In India, some believe Heracles influenced or merged with figures like Vishnu or Krishna, especially in the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms where Greek and Indian cultures overlapped. In Gandharan art, a blend of Greek realism and Buddhist calm, you can spot figures that look suspiciously like Heracles, guarding stupas and standing beside bodhisattvas, lion skin draped over their shoulders. Now he was a guardian of thresholds, a protector, no longer wrestling monsters in Greek swamps, but standing watch at the edge of enlightenment. And then there's the West, the Roman world, where Heracles found a second life. The Romans, practical and fond of useful gods, renamed him Hercules and made him a patron of travelers, merchants, and soldiers. No longer a penitent paying for his sins, he was now a symbol of active virtue, triumph through effort. His club became less about violence and more about persistence. Temples to Hercules appeared in Carthage, Spain, Gaul, and Britain. Roman legionaries carved his name into altars along Hadrian's Wall, even as far north as the Rhine and Danube. He became a Mediterranean hero, now wearing the cloak of empire. But, even as Rome adopted him, Hercules kept his complexity. Romans told jokes about him. They painted him in taverns, sometimes drunk, sometimes asleep, sometimes wrestling pigs instead of giants. He became, oddly enough, a figure of affection, more human than many of their distant, formal gods. In Hispania, modern Spain, and Portugal, Heracles was said to have founded Diz. The Pillars of Hercules, those two great rocks at the Strait of Gibraltar, mark the edge of the known world, non plus ultra, nothing beyond here. A reminder that even the strongest figure in legend has his limits. And then, as the Roman Empire faded and Christianity rose, Heracles was gently repurposed, not erased, just changed. In medieval texts, he was no longer a god, but a cautionary tale, a strong man, yes, but brought low by pride, lust, or anger. The same qualities that once made him heroic now made him tragic. Still, he never disappeared. During the Renaissance, that great revival of classical knowledge, Heracles came roaring back. Artists painted him glowing, muscles rippling, eyes raised in stoic resolve. Writers invoked him in Latin verse. Philosophers used him to argue for the nobility of struggle. Michelangelo sculpted him. Rubens painted him. In Florence, he became a civic symbol, the strongman who defended the city from chaos, a local Hercules dressed up for the times. By the 18th century, Enlightenment thinkers claimed him as a symbol of reason beating superstition. The Hydra became ignorance. The stables, the corrupt institutions of church and state. The metaphor evolved, but the shape stayed the same. Then, in the 20th century, Hercules took a flight to Hollywood. Played by bodybuilders, Italians in sandals, the occasional animated demigod with a singing satyr sidekick. He showed up in comics, commercials, gym names. His strength became a brand. His labors, a plot device. But even beneath the muscle and the camp, something of the old Heracles remained. Still flawed, still funny, still, in his own way, trying to do the right thing. He became whatever each age needed. A god in Egypt, a hero in Rome, a suffering saint in Byzantium, a cartoon in California. His real strength isn't just his power, but his ability to resonate. He fits every era, because at his core, he's not just divine, he's recognizably human. A man who made mistakes, lost his temper, regretted things, tried to fix them, sometimes succeeded, sometimes didn't. In this way, Heracles isn't just a myth. He's a mirror. We see in him the best of ourselves, and sometimes the worst. We see the burdens we carry, and the hope that maybe we can put them down. We see struggle, exhaustion, and finally rest. So when we talk about Heracles around the world, we're not just mapping where he's been. We're tracing all the ways he still matters. In philosophy, in art, in quiet metaphors we use without thinking. To call someone Herculean is to call them strong, yes, but also persistent, determined, willing to face what nobody else will. That's his true legacy, not the temples, not the movies, not the old marble myths, but the idea that real strength isn't about never struggling, but about facing hardship anyway, quietly, relentlessly, and with kindness. So wherever you are, whether you're sitting under electric light or ancient stars, know that the man who once wrestled giants now waits quietly in your story, too. And maybe, when things feel too heavy, you'll remember him, and try anyway. Rest now, listener. The world can wait. The next labor will come in the morning. Tonight, you sleep. Stories don't all end the same way. Some fade away gently, like candlelight at the bottom of a glass. Others echo so long, they forget how to stop. And a rare few keep walking after the last sentence is spoken. Heracles, or Hercules, as the Romans called him, is one of those stories. He began, like many Greek heroes, full of contradictions. Part god, part man, born of an affair between Zeus and a mortal woman, hated by the queen of the gods before he could even walk, loved by many, feared by more, and given a list of impossible tasks to redeem himself. We've followed him through it all, the snake in the cradle, the labors at the edge of the world, madness, wrestling river gods and monsters and grief, the poisoned robe, the flames, the ascent, and finally uneasy peace. But after all this, the question remains, why does he endure? Not just in temples and textbooks, not just in the pages of epics or the flicker of Saturday morning cartoons, but in us. Why is Heracles still here? In our metaphors, our gyms, our dreams, our quiet inner voices. It's not just because he was strong. Strength is everywhere in myth. Titans held up the sky. Cyclopes threw boulders. Achilles was fast. Odysseus was clever. Theseus was brave. Heracles was different. Not for what he could do, but for what he had to do, and for what he endured while doing it. The Greeks never pretended he was perfect. He was impulsive, unpredictable. He killed when he shouldn't. He wept when others wouldn't. He begged for help. He made mistakes and spent years paying for them. And yet, he kept going. That, more than the lion's skin or the club, is the real shape of his legacy perseverance. The Greeks had a word for it: karteria, endurance, the ability to suffer well, to bear unbearable burdens, to carry your own guilt like a sack of stones, and still climb the mountain, to scrub stables when the stench is overwhelming, to fight hydras knowing more heads will grow back, to take on tasks you never asked for, to clean up other people's messes, and to do it not for fame, but because someone has to. Heracles became a vessel for these ideas, not the hero of victory, but the hero of effort. The Stoics saw this. For them, he wasn't just muscle, he was moral fiber. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, doesn't name Heracles, but you can feel him there. You must build up your life action by action, and be content if each achieves its goal as far as possible. And no one can keep you from this. That's the Heraclean life. Not easy, not perfect, but persistent. And in persistence maybe something divine. Even in death, or apotheosis, if you prefer, Heracles didn't drift into some distant, bored god sipping ambrosia on a cloud. He stayed active, invoked present. In Thebes, athletes poured oil on his altars. Wrestlers whispered prayers to him. Soldiers drew his lion head on their shields. Not for invincibility, but for courage. Traders left offerings before long journeys. Ordinary people, not kings or warriors or philosophers, saw in him someone who knew what it was to toil. There's comfort in that. To imagine someone so mighty still understood hardship, that even gods once had to suffer through long days and hard choices, that the divine could emerge not from miracles, but from repetition, from resilience. And he changed over time. That, too, is part of his strength. He became what people needed. To the Greeks, he was the flawed mortal trying to be better. To the Romans, the empire's brawny cousin, civilized and sure. To the Christians of late antiquity, a kind of pagan penitent, suffering for his sins and emerging changed. In the Renaissance, the ideal man, strong of body, bold of spirit, sometimes nude in marble, but always upright. In the modern world, he became the archetype of the hero's journey trials, growth, triumph, even when the names have changed. He's Gilgamesh, Beowulf, Frodo, Luke Skywalker. Every character who starts unready, suffers, fails, learns, and, scarred but wiser, prevails. You've seen him, even if you didn't notice. In the firefighter pushing through smoke. In the parent working 2 jobs. In the student pulling an all-nighter. In the addict trying again. In the heartbroken, healing slowly. He's not just in the mighty, he's in the struggling. He always has been. Because Heracles, as a myth, speaks not to our fantasies, but to our exhaustion. He tells us, yes, it's hard. Yes, you've made mistakes. Yes, you're tired. But go on anyway. Do the next labor. Wrestle the next beast. Clean the next stable. Try again. And if you fail, well, even Heracles failed sometimes. The ancient Greeks, dramatic as they were, understood this quietly. Their temples to him were often built by roadsides, crossroads, city gates, places where travelers passed through, burdened by distance, trade, or fear. They prayed not just for strength, but to keep going. They left offerings of oil, muscle bomb, simple food. They asked for patience, courage, rest. And not just in Greece, along Roman roads, in Spanish and Gallic forums, on the windswept edges of Britannia. His name travelled not in spectacle, but in quiet reliance. He became a sort of spiritual companion. Not the god of thunder, but the god of the weary nod at day's end. It's telling, I think, that Heracles never became the god of conquest or kingship. He's the god of effort, of survival, of the exhausted hero who just keeps moving forward. There's something deeply human in that. Even his apotheosis, his becoming a god, isn't glory, but peace. He doesn't ascend in a chariot with trumpets. He burns, his mortal self stripped away by pain, revealing divinity as the quiet core that remains when everything else is gone. He becomes, in the end, not perfect, but whole. So as our story closes, you might wonder what lasts. Not the monsters, they're gone. Not the labours, they were his. What remains is the idea that we can face the impossible, that strength is measured not by glory but by effort, that you don't have to be a god to matter. You just have to keep going. And sometimes you have to stop, lay down your burdens, rest by the fire, eat, drink, sleep. Heracles would understand. He, more than anyone, earned his rest. And now, so have you. So close your eyes, dear listener. Let the world fall away. The labours are behind you. The lion is tamed. The serpents are gone. The arrows are spent. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're simply becoming, as Heracles did, as we all do. In that slow, unfolding journey, you're not alone. The stars remember Heracles, and they remember you too. Good night, hero. Sleep well.